Did someone burn down World Trade Center Building 7? What were they covering up? Why do the investigating authorities seem uninterested in learning what caused the fire? Welcome back to Critical Theories. Let's get into it. When people think about the World Trade Center, they typically imagine the Twin Towers in New York City and the attacks of September 11, 2001. However, the complex was made up of 7 buildings in total. While the majority of the focus has historically been given to the 2 110-story skyscrapers, the rest of the complex was busy conducting business as usual. Located nearly 400 feet north of the main towers, the original 47-story Building 7 stood quietly, giving no indication to what secrets it might be hiding. When the towers were attacked, all the news was centered on the fallen towers. What happened in the big buildings overshadowed what was happening in the smaller members of the complex. However, at the same time, a fire raged out of control on the lower floors of 7 World Trade Center. When the North Tower collapsed that day, it is reported that flaming debris hit the south face of Building 7. Fires broke out all over the structure, but they were the most fierce between floors 7 through 17. Reports claim that in the rest of the building, the automatic sprinkler system kept the conflagration mostly under control. However, on those floors, the sprinklers needed to be manually turned on in order to function. Coupled with lower water pressure coming through the few sprinklers that did still turn on, the fires destroyed sweeping portions of these lower floors. Later on the afternoon of September 11th, New York firefighters did enter the building and begin putting out small pockets of the fire. However, on these same floors, they found their water pressure was insufficient and the structural integrity of the building appeared to be compromised. Finding no one inside, the fire chief in charge of the operation made the call to halt rescue operations in Building 7 and redirect their focus towards the rest of Ground Zero. Just over 2 hours later, the building collapsed due to the damage sustained from the fire. The destruction of this high-rise has remained a suspicious event, even after several reports into its collapse were published. Why do people think the fires were started on purpose? Who would have burned down 7 World Trade Center? The answer might surprise you. The first report to be released on the collapse was performed by FEMA. They found that the building did not fall due to impact damage from Towers 1 and 2 collapsing nearby, but rather from prolonged sustained fire damage. The out-of-control fires, especially on floors 7, 9, and 13, are what weaken the structure beyond the point of failure. Interestingly, however, the FEMA report made no attempts to determine the initial cause of the fires. This was an immediate red flag for anyone who was paying attention. The government agency that was in charge of investigating the fires was intentionally stopping short of declaring what started the fire. The suspicions raised by this report led to far more questions than answers. Why was the cause of the fire not announced? How did the fire start on the inside? Was it intentional? Was this a cover-up of some kind? If it was a cover-up, what were they covering up? What sort of records were kept and business was done in World Trade Center 7? As these questions began to circulate, other strange elements of the case were also pointed out. The fact that the building was entirely empty seemed peculiar. There was no record of any mass exodus from the high-rise at any point after the attacks began. In fact, no one could even recall seeing anyone enter the building except for the firefighters that afternoon. As far as anyone knew before the tragic events at the World Trade Center, this was just another Tuesday morning, and yet a major hub of business and finance was empty, while the rest of the city bustled. So Building 7 was empty that morning, or rather, it was empty of innocent civilians. Many believe this fire was an intentional act of sabotage, potentially by the United States government themselves. You see, World Trade Center 7 was an important storage space for several federal agencies. The offices were used to keep case files for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Secret Service, and various others. Over 10,000 cases were heavily impacted by the loss of case files and evidence. Major financial cases against the likes of WorldCom, whose scandals and frauds would come to light in the coming years, were affected by the loss of the paper trail connected to them. WorldCom is, according to some experts on the matter, an interesting touchstone for Building 7. Their crimes had not yet been brought to court, yet, according to the SEC, much of the damning documentation in the case against them was stored there and thus lost in the fire. Where exactly were these case files located? Floors 7, 9, 13, and 17. Curiously, the floors rented out by the federal government were the floors most heavily affected by the fires. Those who had stored the records knew what was in them, but their memory did not hold up in court. This was a time before absolutely everything was digitally backed up, so without the physical documents, the testimony of the accusing parties did not carry very far. Some immediately suspected the government. They assumed that a team was sent in to blow up the building and get rid of the evidence. However, the reports that came out over the coming years showed one clear consensus. There were no explosives used, and the fires were not caused by the planes that crashed into the towers. Which means the fires were started within the offices themselves, and the fact that they were allowed to burn for over 7 hours led to the collapse. So the theory that the military was sent in to blow up the building seems flimsy at best. However, sabotage is still on the table. The fires were definitively proven to have started inside the building. The debris from the fallen towers had nothing to do with the fires inside. It also had nothing to do with World Trade Center 7 collapsing. The fires were started inside the building on multiple floors and were allowed to burn for over 7 hours. If someone was looking to get rid of evidence of their crimes or their connection to certain crimes, this would be the way to do it. It can be hard to imagine today, but in 2001, many records were not digitized. Paper copies of statements, memos, and financial records were all anyone had. Digital backups would not be a common practice for several years still. And when it comes to the building in question, there was a large cache of records filed there. Records of financial crimes were being stored in Building 7. The SEC and the FBI have both separately confirmed this fact. While this was not common knowledge at the time, it is not unthinkable for the information to have been leaked out to some of the implicated parties. The FBI has been somewhat secretive about what specifically was stored there, but we do know of several high-profile cases that had evidence destroyed in the files. And when it comes to governmental secrets, sometimes it's best to look at what is not said rather than what the official statement says. The American government revealed that they lost significant records for the WorldCom case in the fires. However, it seems unlikely that those records would have taken up multiple floors of the high-rise. Over the years, there have been many cases that could have had records lost that day. The possibilities are endless and also concerning. Jeffrey Epstein was being investigated off and on by various agencies for 20 years. Would important records in this case have been stored there that long ago? Who knows? It is entirely possible, but there is no definite record available to the public for what was lost. And that is certainly strange. A Freedom of Information Act request will lead nowhere, as the only records it returns are the official reports. The government must know what was stored there. There must be someone who knows what was lost. However, in the 22 years since the fires, no one has spoken publicly about the contents of the files, and so we are left to speculate. Here are the facts. First, the building was empty. This means that everyone who worked there was instructed to stay home for one reason or another, while many would not have gone into work because of the attacks on WTC 1 and 2. There would still have been someone there, unless they were told otherwise. Second, all the reports claim that the debris from the attacks next door had no impact whatsoever on the fires or the subsequent collapse. This means the fire was started inside. Third, the floors where the fires seem to have started conveniently had sprinkler failures, despite the sprinklers working just fine in the rest of the building. The fire suppression systems did not work on very specific floors, and this allowed the fires to reach uncontrollable levels rather quickly. Fourth, By the time the fire department was able to reach Building 7, it was unsavable. This was primarily due to the primary focus of the department being on the aftermath at Ground Zero. There was nothing they could do, and in the interest of the safety of the firefighters, they decided not to advance into the building. It was showing signs that it was nearing collapse, and there was no need to send men in under those conditions. Fifth, there were records of various criminal cases being investigated by at least 2 federal agencies. The exact number of files lost was in the tens of thousands, with many of those records having no backups anywhere else. With these facts in mind, what conclusions can we confidently come to? Whoever started the fires knew how to keep the building clear while they did their business. The fires were started on the floors where the records were being kept, so they knew what they were there to destroy. They likely weren't there to burn down the building entirely, just to get rid of evidence. Unfortunately, the arson coincided with the worst attack on American soil in history, so the fires raged out of control until the building ultimately came down. Whatever records were kept in the building were lost, and the ultimate mission was a success. Records were destroyed, and no one has come forward to date with any detailed list of what was kept there. Whatever was being stored there was important enough to someone that they needed the files eliminated forever. Who and what that was may remain a mystery forever, but given the facts available, we can make several guesses. Perhaps someday the truth will be revealed, but until then, these guesses are all we have. This has been Critical Theories. Thank you for watching.